I never got, because we didn't have enough gas, you ration. And I remember stockings, don't you remember stockings? I don't remember the shoes so much, but I remember the stockings. And I'll just finish off with a little bit of what Mrs. Garlinger was talking about, and that is the USO. My sister, I did a lot of accompanying for the first draftees that came over from the East Coast, and they were a different culture. I remember they were very. They didn't have to wear their uniforms after work. They were the civics. And so many of them were very good musicians, artists, and so on. And they hated being in the Air Force. They were drafted. So it was really a learning experience for me, just culturally speaking, because all of a sudden Salinas was burgeoning with a new type of culture that we weren't used to. It was an exciting period, really. I think for all its badness and sadness, we learn from all these experiences, and I think that's what life is about.
Now let's open it up a little bit and ask the audience if there's something you'd like to ask or say. I mean, many of you here were here. Sir.
There's one thing that really hasn't been brought out, and there was a great exodus from Salinas to the Bay Area to work in the shipyards, and going south to work in the shipyards, and also going south to work in aircraft factories. I had several uncles and cousins and so forth that did this. My young cousins became Rosie the Riveters and so forth like this in these places. It's still not there. We all having trouble with this, aren't we? But that was a big deal, and it paid off pretty well, because when they came back, they were able to buy homes. Most of them had homes already. This was from out of Sal, nearly all of the ones that I knew, and but it was a big deal on there. And the rationing was I can remember that. I was only about 8 years old or so, but I can remember my dad. One night we was in Arizona and going down the road, and it was raining. Somebody had dropped something on the road, and it came up, busted his gas tank. All the gas ran out, so we were dead in the water for a week until they could get some more gas the next week. But all kinds of little things like that. But the work in the shipyards and things was a real big deal during that time.
They also had Spiegel's dehydrated plant. I worked in the lab there for a while, and it was dehydrated cabbage, but it was all chopped up, potatoes and carrots, and they would send them to the servicemen. They had to be soaked in water. The servicemen said they were awful.
Okay,
we put little notes in.
I saw a note go by here. Tell them about somebody want to tell them about what you just said?
No, I don't really say.
Okay, never mind. Was that from Elise? Would you like to tell them? Who else? Who else?
I'm sorry I brought you.
I remember my dad had lots of gas because he worked as a translator. He worked as a translator. And one of the things that the people might remember is that in 43 and 44, we had a lot of German POWs here working in fields because there was nobody else to do the work. All of the Salinas boys were gone, long gone. And when they came back, they weren't inclined to do field work. So my dad would go around with these POW groups and assign groups to different fields and different crops. And they loved it because it was like paradise. They were POWs. They got to do the same kind of work they'd been doing when they were in Europe. And they had a really good time there. And they weren't about to escape because he'd have to walk 3,000 miles and then swim 3,000 miles. None of them were inclined to do that. that was the beginning, the very beginning of the Farm Labor Office. And my dad was Louis Braun, and he worked for the Farm Labor Office for 25 years. And sometime later than that, he was involved with starting the Bracero program, which kind of put us where we are now, with a few humps and bumps along the way. And as a side thing that some of you might remember, they had scrap metal drives during the war. Anybody remember those? Well, one of the casualties from our yard was a early 30s Cadillac Roadster that we couldn't afford to put tires on, so it was just sitting up in the yard on stunts. And I remember that monstrous B-16 car being towed away, and I can still feel the tears when that thing went. It just went off to be crushed. And that would be a multi-million car today. It was about a $75 car then.
So what do we think are the lessons that we learned as a community in World War II? Hold your mic real close.
About 2 days off, and the Japanese guard was right next to me, and he was always motioning. He motioned to my musket. I said, no. So finally, I being shot, so I give him my musket. He got his ration of rice and put it on my musket. And I divided the rice with the rest of the guys that are close to me there. Why he did that, I don't know. To this day, and that's the last I ever seen him. Yeah. So they weren't all bad. I had up in Japan. I worked in a lumber deal there, and there's Suji-san and Yamaguchi-san. And they were little on the middle-aged side. And every time they get a little fish or something, they'd give us a couple. And if they had a cigarette or so, they shared it with us. So the war was over, and these B-29s puts down so darn much food to us. We just stored it in another room. Well, this out of the 200, this Nick Golegas, he was working with me up in the thing, and I said, just get a couple of rice sacks and fill this full of food. And we'll take it back to those two gentlemen back there, our boss. So we filled it full of stuff. Those rice sacks are pretty heavy, you know, they're not light. And we put it what they call a Yeho pole, and we both packed it right up to the guys. It's two guys that started crying.
Oh my God.
Thank you, and all that. They even sent us off to, when we got on that ship, to sail away. But they were good to us, and we thought we'd return the favor. And I still can count in Japanese. Ichi, ni, san, shigo, roku, shichi, hachi, ku. My number in my cap, san, yapa, nanadu, san. Yeah. Waiting for the ship. So finally got the ship, and we pulled out of the Philippines, San Bernardino Straits, and it hit the tail end of a typhoon. I said, yeah, boy, that's the first time. I thought it was going to go right down the line.
You all had the best of luck.
Sick. And then we went towards Mariana Islands, which here's about half a dozen sailors were there the duration. They hopped on our ship. And I got a kick out of those guys that came aboard, though. You know, we had British and Canadians aboard, they're POWs. And this British, this one little, oh hell, I just doubt if he was about 5 foot tall, I guess. And he'd always be the first one in line. So I got quite one of the guys, he says, how do you allow that the guy to get in front of you? Ah, he's been doing that since we got on board. Well, the next time they lined up for chow, they got him by the seat of the pants. He said, listen, you're going to be in the rear of the line because the next time you're going to be out there in the drink, out in the water. Oh, boy.
So let me ask you all, after having lived through this period in Salinas, what have you learned? What did you and your family learn that you could impart to us today that we need to know after you went through all the experiences that you went through? And all your experiences were very different. Who could answer it? Pat Garlinger. I'm going to give you the microphone.
Well, you know, my experiences during the war were so different from lots of them because we weren't a military family. My husband wasn't accepted into the Army because he was too tall, his feet were too big or something, and besides he was a farmer, so he said, what in the world am I going to tell my children when I didn't get to go to war? And I said, well, the only thing you can tell them is that you were home raising food to feed all the Army. So our life on the ranch, which is about 10 miles south of here, was, I would say, very easy compared to a lot of people who had people in the service and the worrying about them. And I was trying to think what I would think about what I learned. And I think I was too young to really think that deep because all I could think of is I hope there's never another war. Too bad.
Mrs. Bungard, what might you say?
Well, I feel the same way. I think we all went, I think the men and the women all went to war happy, and we all went. And the ones that stayed home and the ones that went. But I don't feel like we've ever been through another war like that, and because we've never been as happy to go again, I don't think.
I know one thing I wanted to add is that patriotism was so different then than it was here. I mean, look at John and all those boys that left in junior college. So many of our young men left the junior college. They were just gung-ho to go and save our country, you know, and protect our country. And it's so different nowadays. I don't know what's happened to patriotism. I've always felt very deeply about it. I mean, my country's my country and I don't do anything for it. But nowadays people don't think that way. And I guess it's just the change in the way we're growing up in the United States. Or I haven't got an answer to it. But it's a sad thing because these boys did go so willingly and so happily to protect us.
Anyone else on what you learned or?
No, I want to agree with Pat. I think that the patriotism was wonderful. It was one of the greatest things during that time. So, and as far as, I think all the fellows that was in the tank club, they just felt that it was their duty to go and serve.
My dad was in the produce business in Salinas, and he was too old to get into the Second World War. He tried everything he could. So he went back to Washington, D.C. and ran the fresh fruit and vegetable division of the OPA and was gone much of the war, and I was quite young at the time. And what I learned was our job is to serve our country when we can in any way we can, in voluntary and in whatever every way, because I had my dad who was gone. I mean, he wanted to be in the war, it wouldn't take him, but he served as best he could, which we all should be doing.
Would anyone else like to add anything?
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. Elise and I were a little younger. We were in Washington Junior High, which was a new school at that time. My brother Ed Tregenza was at Pearl Harbor, and so we were on that Sunday evening wondering whether he was alive or dead, and for me it was an excuse not to do my homework. But as far as how life changed, my father had immigrated from England and then had too many children for World War II, but like somebody else mentioned, he always felt he didn't want to be considered a slacker by not defending his adopted country. But he went back to work. He had a carpenter's trade and helped build the Permanente plant. And my mom went to work for the Waiuli Rubber Company as a chemist. The man who came out from Louisiana to run that was a guest in our home. We lived on Capitol Street. My older sister did the USO dances with her friend Frances Wilbur. And because my three older siblings were in the Navy, we had empty rooms in our home, and so when the wives would come out to see their husbands before they were being shipped out, we'd often, through the USO, rent rooms to them. And my younger brother, one time, fortunately the rooms were empty because he was demonstrating how my grandfather's shotgun worked, and he shot the gun through the floor into the door where sometimes those soldiers and their wives were staying, so that was a lovely thing. But it did change a lot for the younger generation, and I think the difference was that we were attacked in that war, and it was supposed to be the war to end all wars. My husband, that I met at Waiter College, couldn't wait to get in. When he was 18, coerced his parents into signing him in. He was in the South Pacific, but then got called back right after college for the Korean War. So I think what we need to learn is that war doesn't improve much, and it disrupts many, many lives, and yet the human spirit comes through, like so many people have shared, that human beings have a basic good that we need to focus on and not get down by all the tragedies, and we have to be hopeful.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Gail Ulich. Frank Muther was my dad. And I want to thank all of you for telling your stories, because as we go forward, I think it gives us strength that no matter what happens in the future for us or our grandchildren, that we need to keep the lessons that you have taught us. One of the things Dad said, we grew up while Roy and Dad told stories about being in the war, and the stories were all mixed up. Dad would talk about one camp and then another camp and being on the ships, and we really never did understand the story all the way through. So finally one day we said, Dad, sit down and tell your story. And I think we kind of got it in order on a videotape, so that was really nice. But I said, how did you make it all those years, 3.5 years in prison camp with the torture and all? And Roy and Dad worked on a ranch, and my dad had Blanco Dairy. He had worked on the ranch, and the men who were working were very strong, and so they had strength to do the things that they needed in the prison camp. So actually they worked in the coal mines, and that gave them something to do. But Dad said he kept thinking the whole time, and actually had a little prayer book with him with a little American flag in it that he actually brought home. And he said they always thought, somebody has to come home and tell the story. And he came home and told the story. But I know you've been talking about the first day of the war, and Dad told a story about the last day of the war that I'll never forget. He said that right after the bombing of Hiroshima, they saw these planes flying over, and out of the planes dropped cartons of cigarettes, and inside the cartons or inside the package of cigarettes, it said, "Boys, the war's over. It's time to go home."
Never heard that.
That's good.
Never heard that.
My twin sisters were going to Salinas Junior College, but they lived in Pacific Grove, and on Saturdays they worked in the Waiuli fields. And Army trucks from the Presidio in Monterey would bring them over to the fields in Salinas, and they said it was very hard work. They had to do a lot of weeding, and the reason Waiuli was an important agriculture plant at that time was because they were they say that they could get rubber out of it, and we were so afraid that we would run out of rubber from the east, you know. And so anyway, they said it was the hardest work that they'd ever done was weeding in the Waiuli fields. Whether they used the short-handled hoe or not, I don't know, but that's their story.
One of the things that occurs to me as I hear all of you speak, and part of the goal of our project here, Salinas Stories, is to get people together to value listening to each other. And we hope that this program today will make you go home and record the stories of your family, because it occurs to me as I sit here and hear this, that these stories are passing away, and these are precious and irreplaceable things. And I thank you all for being here for this part of our program, and we'll close and take a break, and there'll be cookies in the back, and I hope you will come back for the second part of our program, which starts at 3:30, which will talk about the Japanese internment in Salinas. We did a separate panel particularly because we wanted to go in depth what that was like and what that means for our country. So I hope you won't go away. And I hope that you'll go home tonight and get a tape recorder and make a plan to record someone in your family so that their stories go forward. And I'd like to thank all of you today for your time, and I hope you'll stay. So take care. We'll be back at 3:30. Thank you.
They will survive. Everybody will make it. We'll head up past more Bridge. Think how hard it was through the Depression.
Salinas, the Japanese internment in Salinas, as experienced by people who were either here in Salinas or in Monterey County, or came back and lived in Salinas and are part of our community. So Garland Thompson, my colleague, is going to start us off by setting the tone, the scene for the moment in time.
Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing today? Doing good out there?
Yes.
Yes? Good. Well, please allow me to set the scene for the second of our panels. And this one, as you've just been told, is going to focus on the Japanese internment, Japanese-American internment that happened here in America. A very dark, dark chapter in our American history. The bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, had an immediate effect on the Japanese community, the Japanese-American community here in Salinas. Within 2 days, the bank accounts of Japanese Americans were frozen, causing great hardship and confusion for families unable to access their money. Shortly afterward, the FBI arrested the Buddhist ministers and the Issei, first-generation leaders of Salinas' Japanese-American community. The younger generation was suddenly thrust into leadership positions in the community. There was great fear in Salinas and Monterey that the Japanese military would soon attack the coast, and these fears seemed to be confirmed on Saturday, December 20th, when Japanese submarine I-23 surfaced and chased the tanker ship Ajiworld across Monterey Bay, firing several dozen rounds in full view of the coast. Curfews and restrictions on the Japanese community increased through January and February, culminating in President Roosevelt's issuance of Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942, ordering the removal of all Japanese citizens and aliens from the coastal regions of the western United States. Japanese families were given a short time to voluntarily move from the area. Not many families were able to make the arrangements in time to move before it was too late. Thus, Japanese families were forced to sell their land, their houses, and their personal property at pennies on the dollar. In April of 1942, exclusion orders gave the heads of all the families of Japanese ancestry 2 days to appear and receive instructions of how their family should report to the Salinas Assembly Center, a temporary detention facility that had been hastily created at the Salinas Rodeo grounds. Families were allowed to take with them only what they could carry. 3,586 people moved into the Salinas Rodeo grounds, living in tents, barracks, and stables in the mud. They stayed for 4 months, waiting to see what would happen to them next. We didn't have the slightest idea of where we were going to go, said one Japanese American. In July of 1942, most of Salinas' Japanese families were moved to the Poston concentration camp in Arizona. It was 120 degrees in Parker, Arizona. Letters home reported temperatures of 119 inside the barracks. And on July 28th, an internee from Watsonville reported with pride in a letter home, less than a month after their arrival in Poston, "There's still some Watsonville pride. When the people from Salinas Center got here, they started fainting right and left. Most people from Salinas, California fainted. As a whole, Watsonville people were strong." One Watsonville man died, and 7 Salinas people died. In 1945, Japanese American internees began being released from the camps. Anti-Japanese sentiment ran particularly high in Salinas, exacerbated by the fact that so many of Salinas' young men had been killed by the Japanese military in the Bataan Death March and the POW camps in the Philippines. By 1950, there were only 162 residents in Salinas compared to 531 in Monterey. Thank you.
So it's December 7th, 1941 again in Salinas. And Janice Higashi of Higashi Farms was born in Salinas, and she was still in grade school in Salinas on December 7th, 1941. During the war, her family was interned in Poston internment camp in Arizona. Paul Ichiuji, who is a Salinas resident now, was in high school in Pacific Grove during the outbreak of the war. And his family was one of those who were able to move inland before the internment and were not interned in the camps. And Mr. Ichiuji plays an ongoing role in Salinas' remembrance of the Japanese internment by organizing the annual remembrance ceremony at the Garden of Memories at the Salinas Rodeo grounds, which this year's ceremony will take place, if I understand, tomorrow at from 1:30 to 4 o'clock at the Rodeo grounds. Mei Sakasagawa was 13 years old when the war started. Her family was interned at was held at the Salinas Assembly Center, and they spent the war in Poston. Her husband, Roy Sakasagawa, won medals for his performance in the U.S. Armed Services as part of the 442nd Infantry, which was a unit composed of mostly Japanese Americans who fought in Europe during the Second World War, many of whose families were at that moment interned in America. Mrs. Sakasagawa has been working on a pictorial history of the first generation Japanese in this area and has gathered the history of 79 families. Craig Yama was 18 or 19, and he was going to, I would say Hartnell College, but it was Salinas Junior College, wasn't it, on the day of Pearl Harbor. Shortly afterward, his father was picked up by the FBI, along with the other leaders of the Japanese community in Salinas. Mr. Yama was interned with the rest of his family at Poston. Shortly after the war, he joined U.S. Military Intelligence Service, and he worked for American services in post-war Japan. And we also have with us today Mary Odo, who came to the panel and would like to share her story with us, and we're delighted to have her. So I'm going to open us up today with some questions. And I'd like to start on that day, December 7th, 1941. And we've talked about this, what it was like in the general population of Salinas, but we wanted to take some time to talk about what it was like within our Japanese American community, many of them U.S. citizens like all of us here. So I would like to ask, first, Mr. Yama, to talk about the beginning days right after the days of Pearl Harbor.
I don't know whether I'm prepared for all of this, but I'll try my best. When the war started, we didn't have the slightest idea as to what was going to happen. And I guess all of our young fellows talked to each other and said, we're citizens, they can't do anything to us. And within a few days, they picked up the leaders of our community, church board members and our ministers, and anybody else that was in the organization related to the Japanese Americans. And beyond that, I guess we just felt there's nothing we could do, so we just sat tight to see what would happen.
And tell us about the bell at the temple, the gong of the temple.
Oh yes, I don't know if all of you or some of you know there's a big Japanese bell hanging at a Buddhist temple on California Street. Our minister told my dad that he got a call from the chief of police that you better put that bell away, otherwise everybody thinks that you're going to signal with that gong and the ship would come into Monterey and start an invasion. So my dad and the minister went across the street to a garage, Osugi Garage, and got a block and tackle and cut a hole in the floor and then lowered it into the basement. And it stayed in there until well after the war.
Mr. Ichiuji, what was happening for you that day and the early days after?
Well, I remember December 7th in 1942 so well. Our family was up in San Francisco to see my cousin off. He was to be shipped to Philippines, and so we had all gone up to see him off. And so as we were boarding the ship to Angel Island, which was the disembarkment of the Army, we heard on this loudspeaker that Japan had bombed us. And it was just unbelievable. And so we all dashed back to our cars to listen to the radio. And my brother Joe, he was also in the service. And so there was orders to get back to your military installation. And so of course we all dashed back to Pacific Grove, and then the business experience was, how am I going to approach? I was a senior in high school at Pacific Grove High School. What are they going to, how are you going, their reaction to me? Well, fortunately, I went to school with some of the people that had gone from first grade all the way to Pacific Grove High School, and so they were very, very supportive of me. But I really don't know what the faculty thought. But that's my experience on December the 7th.
Mrs. Higashi?
Well, I was in junior high school, and I was very apprehensive about going to school the next day. But, you know, nobody said anything, and, you know, I just kept my mouth quiet and, you know, managed to survive the day. But my father was one of those people that picked up right away. And so we were...
Speak into the microphone real close here.
We were living on a farm, so we had another house in Salinas, so I don't know exactly how we managed to pack up and move quickly into the house that was near my grandparents in town. So that's where we were until we had to depart for the Salinas Assembly Center. But I don't know, you know, we had people taking care of our dogs, and I don't know how my mother packed everybody up because there were 6 of us, and unfortunately my grandparents, you know, were here. We had uncles that helped us move out of the house into town again, but I'm sure my mother, it was a very stressful time for her, and we managed to survive all that moving, and then we had to just start packing again because we had to go to the Salinas Assembly Center. But it's something that it stays with you forever, and you just don't, you lost all your privacy, and, you know, we had to take, the one thing I remember, we had to take showers, you know, and we all would cover ourselves up because we were so bashful, and all these things.
Let's stay in Salinas before we get to the assembly, because there's a lot to say about that. What did you think when your father was picked up one of the first few by the FBI? How did that affect your family?
Oh, we were just, you know, I just didn't know what to, you know, we thought they might ship him somewhere we'll never see him again, but we were able to go and see him, and they had him behind bars, which was, you know, and he didn't commit any crime, but I remember going there, and we were very tearful when we said goodbye to him because we didn't know when we would ever see him again. And it was very traumatic, but fortunately we had our grandparents that supported us, and we were able to stay with them. So we kind of weathered that part of our very, very emotional part of our life.
And Mrs. Sakasagawa, what was it like for you in those early days?
Well, both my parents were born in Salinas, and so being a third generation, I think they protected us from a lot of things. They didn't say too much about the war or the evacuation. I do remember that when we were going to the Salinas Assembly Center, we didn't know whether we were going to be sent to a hot place or a cold place. And my mother and father's guess was that we were going to go up in the frozen north someplace. So they packed woolen clothes. And then we ended up in Poston, Arizona with our woolen clothes. My grandmother had a beaver coat, which she cherished, and she wore that to Poston, Arizona. That's part of some of the things I remember. I was only 13, and my parents were very protective. They didn't say too much about the war or anything else. We just followed what they told us to do. We lost a lot. What we missed a lot was our friends. We had to leave all our friends that we grew up with from kindergarten till 8th grade. We had to leave our pets behind. We had 3 dogs. All our good friends. We had a lot of good friends that supported us during this time. And they were very good to us when we got back, too. Thank you.
And do you remember, and so February 19th, and by the way, that's this week, when the Executive Order 9066 came down, and we have an original copy here of what was posted.
Lori?
Yes.
May, did they provide school for you after you got to Poston?
Yeah, we all helped build our adobe schoolhouses. We made adobe bricks out of straw and mud, and we helped build our adobe schoolhouses. And there were teachers within our group, and they volunteered for $19 a month. Everyone was paid $19 a month. Doctors, everybody, cooks, everyone that worked in the camps.
But let's hold off on Poston, because I want to keep us, as we're still in Salinas, I want everyone to understand what it must have felt like for these people as it dawned on them slowly what was really going to happen. Because what I'm learning as I've been speaking to all these people is that they thought, well, we're an American citizen, we'll be fine, this is America. So that's why I wanted to walk us through this as it slowly developed. And it was the very few first months of World War II when this developed. So February 19th, when Executive Order 9066 came down. Mr. Yama, could you speak about that?
Incidentally, I have here a copy of an exclusion order. One morning we woke up, and these were posted on the telephone poles. And in it said, all persons of Japanese ancestry, citizens, and all aliens and non-aliens. Now, non-aliens who are citizens. They didn't dare say aliens and citizens, so they called us non-aliens. So we were citizens, but they use all these euphemisms.
Speak it to the microphone, please.
Oh, to justify this evacuation. And these were posted on the telephone poles throughout the city and county. And on it, it says, report to the local armory with what you can carry. And you have 6 days to report to the armory. So what are we going to do? Now, once that order came, my dad was already picked up by the FBI and sent to internment camp in Bismarck, North Dakota. And my brother, incidentally, my brother was drafted into the service prior to December 7th. So he was in the United States Army. And then within about 3 weeks after this war, one day he came home. I said, how come? He says, well, I'm in my uniform, but they discharged me because you're Japanese and we don't want you anymore in the service. So he was discharged from the service, and I don't know what his discharge classification was, but anyway, they discharged him because he was of Japanese ancestry and they were at war with Japan. Now, we were given about 5 or 6 days to report to the armory. So my brother and I packed everything into the back room of our house and put a half-inch plywood and nail about 4 inches long and nailed the back room door so that everything that we owned were in this room. And so we reported to the armory and they took us to the assembly center. Want to go further?
I'd like to hear from other people
Okay.
as they had. And first of all, set me straight. February 19th was the beginning, and then wasn't there specific orders that came out in March and people had to report in April? Let me know. Do you
I might
remember?
just add on to the February 19, 1942. It was President Franklin Delano Roosevelt who had signed this Executive Order 9066, which authorized the military to move 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast and to be incarcerated in some concentration camp in the 10 parts of the United States. And so it is really a day of infamy that the Japanese American Citizens League, we sponsor a day of remembrance. And that's in sort of memory of those who had gone to the Assembly Center, and also for the purpose of being a watchful eye that no other Americans be taking their constitutional rights away. And so that's really our purpose of our Day of Remembrance. And so tomorrow we are going to hold our Day of Remembrance at Salinas Community Center at 1:30. And as our speaker we have Sandy Lyman. I don't know whether many of you know Sandy Lyman, but he's a historian emeritus of Cabrillo College. And he has so much knowledge on the Chinese and Japanese, and so he should be a very special speaker. I'm sorry, you asked me one other question.
What was it like for you?
Well, you know, our family didn't interpret the executive order too well, and so we took the option of moving across the 99 highway and figuring that we were in compliance. And so we went to Greeley, California. However, we were wrong. We got the same order as those people from the Assembly Center that you are going to be transferred to a permanent camp. I would like to add more onto the camp, but would that be a little later?
We'll be talking about the camp when we get there, yeah. Mrs. Sagashi, would you like to say anything? Do you remember February 19th? Do you remember how that affected your family?
Well, you know, being that I was just a kid, I remember that, you know, I was a little hesitant about going back to school, wondering what was going to happen to us. But I just, you know, kind of I think I tried to block all those things away because such, you know, it's such an unpleasant time in my life. And I just don't even think about it now.
And Mrs. Sakasagawa, and then we'd like to hear from Mary Odo on the other side.
Well, my father had, he was a second generation here, he belonged to a lot of clubs and organizations like golfing and bowling and the Rod and Skeet Gun Club. He had a collection of guns. And a lot of the things that he had some of his good friends save for him. I think the government was starting to take away radios and stuff like that, so he had them stored with some friends. So when we got back from camp, he was able to keep his mementos. That's about all I remember, is that, you know, packing away some of his things that he wanted to save with his friends. I don't remember too much else about, you know, other things.
Now I'm going to give the microphone to Mary Odo, who, as I understand, was in Canada at the time. Is that so?
Yes, my name is Mary Otto, and when the war started on December 7th, it was 5 days after my 19th birthday. And I remember that day, and I was listening to radio, just listening to one of these, well, there's no TV, so we're just listening to radio and enjoying the dramas that we were able to hear. And all of a sudden the radio stopped and the Pearl Harbor bombardment was mentioned, and I couldn't believe my ears. And I said to my mother, because she doesn't speak English, I said, "Mother, apparently Japan has dropped a bomb on Pearl Harbor. And I think we're going to have a big war." what's going to happen to us? And from then on, it was a chaos for our family. But it was my father that went to all kinds of meetings day after day. And it took the Canadians a long time to really decide what to do with us, because I feel that they were listening to what the American government was going to do with the Japanese. And so therefore, we didn't really get evacuated till August of 1942. The war started 41, December, and so it took us that long to be evacuated.
Which is at the same time when people from Salinas were moved in July from the Salinas Assembly Center to the internment camps.
Would you like me to go further on, or would you like me to stop here and wait for the...
I'd like to ask all of you what it was like. You were told to bring only what you could carry. Well, I would like to know what you decided to carry.
Well, would you like me to get into that first then? We were told just to take the essentials and what we can carry in suitcases. So there were 4 of us, and we were able to take 1 suitcase each of our clothing. As for the box, there was a certain size of box that they told us to put our kitchen utensils on, what we needed for everyday living. So that was prepared. And many things. I remember my mother was crying when she had to depart or sell some of the things that she valued, because we were not able to take them. The family treasures, we just could not. And so anyways, we did not leave Vancouver until August 1942, excuse me. By that time, the waiting was so long that some of the people made up their mind to go to other provinces. We call it state, but in Canada it's a province. There's the Alberta province, where they went to the sugar beet farm, Alberta, and then there's Manitoba, Winnipeg, Ontario, and Nova Scotia, and all across these Canadian states. They really scattered by that time. And there were just very few of us that went, there were many slow camps, what we call the ghost camps, the ghost town mining camps. And the Canadian government looked for these places, the old mining camps. There were places like New Denver, Slocan, and I can't remember all of them, but anyways, the place that they chose for us to go was a newly made internment camp, and it was an internment camp.
So hold right there, and I'd like to hear more from people about this moment when suddenly you're asked to pack up what you can carry. Can you pass the microphone down, and I'd like to hear from each of you, please.
First of all, I'll show you a picture of the Salinas rodeo ground. See all the baggage thrown on the ground and the barracks behind it. We had to sort through that and then carry our luggage to our assigned barracks. Now the barracks were just a single board with tar paper on the outside, held down with the lattice.
Speak into the microphone.
Okay, did you get that? And believe it or not, those are airplanes flying above these barracks. There was an airport by Sherwood Gardens. I don't know if any of you remember, but there was an airport, and you could see the airplane flying above the barracks by the rodeo grounds. Now, here we are lined up to board the train, and in the background are MPs, it's hardly visible here, but the MPs are there to load us on our assigned trains. And the train was really beat up, and we couldn't open the shade. We had to keep the shade
You're not
drawn.
going to Poston yet, are you? Don't go to Poston yet.
Too far ahead.
But I want to ask about your family. What was it like to pack up and to get ready? You didn't know where you were going, right? You didn't know how long you would be gone. What did you do with everything you didn't take?
Well, in our case, we had our home, and like I mentioned a while ago, we put everything in the back room and boarded up with a big plywood and nailed it down. And the only thing we all took was our clothing and toilet articles. We weren't allowed to take any kitchen utensil because the detention center itself had a mess hall, and they weren't going to furnish all that to us. And in our case, after we got into camp, one day the camp director came to us and said, you had a fire at your home, so we'll allow you to go out to see it with a guard. So the guard took us to our home, and sure enough, there was a fire. And what happened was the people that rented our house had broken in and taken whatever they want and lit a fire to it. So we have nothing at all of our family pictures, all of our token things that every family would have. We haven't got any of the old pictures of the family or anything.
Mrs. Higashi, or Mr. Ichiuji, you didn't have to pack quite like that, but what would you like to say?
Well, we were very fortunate to be a citizen of Pacific Grove because those people were really, really nice people. I'll be honest with you, we opened our house up to different families to put their belongings in our house because we were just going to leave our house and let's go into camp. And so the town was only 5,000 people, and so at one point we felt that we knew practically everyone in the town. And I know even the police chief, my father used to like sake, and so the police chief himself would be coming to make various visits to our home to drink sake. So we had real nice people, and like the rest of, we just took our clothing, basically clothing. Well, we didn't know what our stay would be, but that was basically what we took. But may I we're going to go into Poston a little later, or?
Go into Poston in a little bit.
Okay. Let's see. So that was it. We just boarded the train just like everybody else and took our suitcases. Yes.
Was your house kept for you?
Yes. In fact, my father had 2 fish ponds, and one lady would walk 2 blocks with a bucket of water to make sure the fish had the water. And so that's how nice the people were in Pacific Grove.
Mrs. Higashi?
Well, since I was just a kid, I just did what my parents told me, but I do remember that we packed our suitcases and
speak into the microphone.
We packed whatever we could. I don't think we took too many things because we could only take what we could carry. So that didn't leave much room for anything except our clothing and maybe a few books, your cherished books. And I don't really remember because I think we just did what our parents told us to do.
And Mrs. Sakasagawa, you also mentioned, I think, that how long did you think you would be gone? What was it like for you? And were you planning to be gone a long time?
Yeah, well, everyone thought that the war wasn't going to last too long, and everyone thought they were going to come back to Salinas soon. So that's why a lot of people left their things and weren't prepared to leave for a long time. They were thinking they were going to come back within a few months or a year or whenever the war was going to end. The only thing I remember is my father bought us trunks. Those metal trunks? Because it would hold more than a suitcase. So each of us had a trunk. And the only thing I remember is we all had tags put on us like you see refugees with our numbers on it. Each one had a assigned number on it, and we had those tags put on us. That's all I remember.
And I remember pictures, there are pictures of people standing, waiting with piles of things on the ground, everyone wearing tags. And did you have to assemble, those of you who were in Salinas, at the armory to wait for the bus to get to the Salinas assembly? What was that like?
Yeah, we sat in front of the armory, and the picture that you have on your thing.
On the brochure?
Yeah, that's my family there. That's me in the middle of it.
Do you mean on the green brochure about the program?
Yeah.
Does someone have that? So can you hold that up? So this is a picture of a family right here sitting by this. So we didn't know, the Monterey County Historical Society didn't know whose family that was. So tell us about that picture.
Well, that picture, I'm the one sitting right in front of that poster, right next to my aunt who has a hat on. My cousin is sitting to the left of me, and that's my uncle to the left of her. And my cousin is standing with his cowboy hat on. And my grandmother there on the other end with her fur coat.
That's the beaver coat.
Right.
Do you remember that moment sitting there? Were you waiting for the bus?
Oh yes, I remember that. Yeah, before we got on the train. No, before we went into the assembly center.
So what happened next? They put you on the bus and you piled all this with your grandmother in her beaver coat?
No, well, we were on the bus, but they loaded our luggage into trucks and brought them in a big pile over there.
And what was it like then to arrive at this? Did you know you were going to the rodeo grounds at the time?
Oh yes, we did.
And what was it like when you arrived? What did it look like?
It was rainy and muddy, and it was pretty miserable. We were in the barrack. Going from a house home to a barrack was, and I think there was 4 families in each barrack. I mean, it was separated into 4 units, I believe. So each barrack housed, I think, 4 families.
And
how long were you at the rodeo grounds?
From, I think it was April to July, wasn't it?
Yeah, July.
And families were able to stay together?
Yeah.
So now let's talk about life at the Salinas Assembly Center, what that was like. Go ahead. I've been stopping you as you've been getting into it. Please give us a picture of what it was like to live in the mud at the rodeo grounds for months.
Well, we had to stand in line to go to the mess hall and get fed. That was not very nice. The only good thing I remember is Mr. Peavy, who was gymnast at Hartnell College. He came with his troupe and entertained us on his